Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the ConTinual panel room. Today, we're discussing mythological tropes in science fiction and fantasy. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott, and we'll start by going around the panel and asking them to introduce themselves briefly and tell us what they write. Kyoko, will you start us?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Kyoko M. I am the author of the Black Parade Urban Fantasy series and the Of Cinder and Bone science fiction Dragon Hunt series as well.
Patrick?
I'm Patrick Thomas. I'm the author of the Murphy's Law series, the Mystic Investigators series, and Dear Cthulhu, among others.
Jenny?
Hi, I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for dog books, and I write under a variety of pen names in every length and genre.
Fraser?
Hi, I'm Fraser Sherman. I write historical fantasy and film reference books.
Violet?
My name is Violette Meier, and I write the Angel Crush saga along with a number of urban fantasy and paranormal books.
Tom?
I'm Tom Doyle. I wrote the contemporary military fantasy, the American Craftsman trilogy, the twisted space opera Border Crosser, and a series of audio adventures in the 6th century.
And Tigris?
Hi everyone, Tigris Eden here. I write paranormal romance, best known for my Shadow Unit series, and I write under multiple pen names as well and different subgenres.
Okay. So first, let's talk about what a trope actually is and how they fit into genre fiction. Like how do they shape reader expectations when they pick up a genre? Patrick, will you start?
Sure. I think if someone is familiar with it, they've read multiple books and they have in common several things. I think the most common for fantasy would be vampires. If you have a vampire in your book, everyone expects it to be similar to other vampires they've read. So if suddenly your vampire is sparkling or something else, it's a little different. It may take some getting used to, but it's how we present things, and sometimes breaking the tropes can be a lot of fun.
Okay. Jenny?
I agree with that. And also, I think a trope is something that is an expectation in the genre. And so, if you're writing something in noir, you expect a hard-boiled detective and a femme fatale, not necessarily, people that are light and happy. So there are expectations that those tropes that you want to make sure you hit them correctly so that people enjoy it. And then, like Patrick said, subvert where you can and when it's fun.
Fraser?
If you're talking mythology specifically, tropes are various themes or stories or figures from mythology. And I think the most important thing to set up is, are you using them with a lot of fidelity to the source material, or are you carving your own path? And either one is okay, but if people think you're faithful and you're not, they're going to wonder, how did you get it so wrong? So make it clear.
Violet?
A trope is using the speech and the things that the characteristics that we are usually used to. It's something that's culturally familiar to a lot of people. But like Tom said, I enjoy breaking tropes because it gives a little bit of unpredictability.
Tom?
Oh, did I say that? Okay.
Was that Tom?
So I, with tropes and gods and myths, I think with science fiction, there's an expectation that whatever you're taking from myth or deity is going to be rationalized or historicized in some way. And that if it's in fantasy, you can go whole hog on actual supernatural aspects when you absorb them. But there you're going to have the old Euripidean tension between the tendency to humanize versus the original material and the deities. So that's where I think the expectations in different parts of science fiction and fantasy come to interact with the tropes.
Tigris?
I agree with what everybody said so far. I know there's a lot of us on here. I'll just add to that is to say there are certain expectations that our readers do expect when they're reading from a trope. You know, boy meets girl, girl falls for guy, blah blah blah. Those things. Werewolf, vampires. You know, you've got your hunters. I fall on the shade of I'm always breaking the trope because I will take the mythology and I will give just a teeny bit of background history and then I flip it on its head and make it my own.
Okay. Kyoko?
I think of tropes as kind of like a miniature writing device. It's definitely based on something that's been very commonly discussed or played with or written in different types of fiction, nonfiction, and they can definitely be really good guidelines and something to it kind of gives you something to build on in a way, because a lot of them are already pre-established and you decide whether or not you want to include a certain trope, exclude a certain trope, or like they've mentioned before, kind of turn it on its head and do something fun or new.
Okay, well, this seems like a good point to ask you all to share ways that you have used any particular trope, and if you've subverted it, tell us that too. Gini, will you start?
Yes, I've never met a trope I didn't love, honestly. I like tropes. I like to hit them hard. I like to change them a little bit, but I guess I subvert, but I don't subvert that much. In the Alien series, I think my biggest trope subversion is that there's a love triangle, and Kitty doesn't pick the brooding jerk, which I think is a trope that's expected in anything even remotely romantic, is that the guy who glares at you all the time, that's your one true love, and I just can't go for that. So I'll subvert a trope like that. But otherwise, I really, really like them. I think they exist in the same way archetypes do. It's something that you almost can shorthand to your readers what it is you're trying to do, and I like doing that. And that I've probably subverted more tropes than not. But now that you asked, I can't remember any others that I've done.
Well, isn't that always the way?
Yep.
Got it until somebody asks you. Hey, Alma.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
That's okay. We are actually discussing what tropes people use in their work and how they subvert them, if they do. So before you answer that question, could you introduce yourself to the viewers? Just tell us briefly who you are and what you write.
Alma Alexander. I write fantasy, science fiction, and things in between. I kind of write across the spectrum, so it's hard to say I write this and that, the other thing specifically. I've written all tropes of fantasy, from the high fantasy kind of fully second world immersive stuff to what they call contemporary fantasy, to one of my biggest books being described by one reviewer as feminist fantasy, whatever that meant. Just excuse me, I'm just connecting again for some reason. I'll have to unload that second connection before I start echoing. I think that should do it. Okay. But other than that, what was the question I'm supposed to answer?
What mythological tropes do you use in your work? And if you subvert them, give us an example, please.
I'll give you two. One was, so far it's like two books that are interspersed. It's sort of a mosaic novel. It's a series of interrelated short stories. And the books are under the umbrella of Val Hall, which is a retirement home for superheroes, third class. Superheroes are a big trope, but my superheroes are superheroes first class, first of all, are just your common or garden gods. I mean, they are the trope of the superhero god. They can't help it. That's what they are. They've got superpowers because they are godlike and they function in our world with superpowers. They can't help it. Superheroes second class are the people who just throw money at the problem, like your Batmans of the world, and basically he's got all the Bat toys, the Batmobiles, and the Bat this and the Bat that and the Bat the other thing. So basically he's a superhero, but he's in real life is just a rich bloke who's probably going to die in his bed surrounded by progeny and friends. but he doesn't have any specific superpowers that are like tremendously in your face type of thing. He's just buying it. Superheroes third class, which is my superheroes, which is my subversion, are your common garden people like you, like me, like your friend, like your brother, like your kid, who are faced with something in their lives, some kind of event which triggered a superhero response. And these superheroes who reacted to that kind of thing, like, for example, what I've done is every single story is datelined and connected to something. Like, for example, the Challenger disaster. My superhero of the story is somebody whose ability was triggered by that. Another one is Mount St. Helens eruption, for instance. Things like that. So I'm basically using the superheroes as a trope, but putting the superhero powers onto ordinary people and seeing how that affects the ordinary person inside that cloak, as it were. Which was an incredibly fun thing to do in one sense. What is happening soon is that I'm collecting these 2 books plus a couple of stories that no one's seen yet in the same universe in one volume that should be out by the end of the year. So that's my sales pitch.
Okay. All right.
Just stop me if I'm talking too much. My other superhero inversion trope is when I did my Weir Chronicles books, and I did the Weir trope, which a lot of people have done in a certain way, in a very different way. I have a master's degree in molecular biology. I actually put together a completely plausible way that Weir creatures could exist in a human context. And my supervisor for my master's thesis, who read the book, told me that the science is as good as it gets. So it's possible.
Okay, Fraser, how about you?
Let's see. Mostly, I suppose, for mythology, I like putting mythological figures in strange situations. There was a story I wrote a few years ago, Heads Up. It was a flash fiction. Guy is desperate to get his laundry done because he's got a date and he's got to look good. And when he opens the washing machine, the head of Mimir is floating in the tank. And he doesn't, that's Mimir, the guy from Norse mythology. Oh. And he does not want to be disturbed. But I need to get my laundry done. Go away. And things proceed from there. So if I can make it absurd and keep the mythology the same and put it in a strange situation, I'm happy.
Okay. Violet?
The mythological tropes I like to play with are angels, like in my Angel Crush series. But I also play with, I guess, themes that are tropes like good versus evil, but I turn them around to let you know that it's never clear cut. There are always shades of gray. And sometimes it's hard to differentiate between the two. I like villains with hearts of gold, because I don't think anyone is all bad and all good. So some of those tropes are the ones that I like to play with the most in a lot of my writing.
Okay, Tom?
Well, one thing that I've played with across 3 different stories, and I think is really valuable when you're looking at mythology, is a location. That myths are things that are situated, and the people, who believed in these things believed that the deities were associated with particular places and particular rites. And so I've taken Delphi in 3 different stories, and I looked both at the stories about it, but also the historical aspect, where it may have been an intelligence center of sorts, that its biggest heyday was telling people where to go settle. And the way it learned that was people would come in and make the offerings and they would have their questions. But even as they were asking their questions, they would be being interviewed about what they knew. And so you have people coming from all over asking questions, but also telling knowledge. And this is how during, say, the 7th century and before, these colony expeditions were set out. So I see this and I go, well, there's many ways to play with this. Most recently in the audio series I'm doing for Graphic Audio, Agent of Exiles, in book 2, the James Bond-like figures are going to go to Delphi because it is a center of sort of intelligence activity in that in that version of the 6th century BCE. But I also have played with it from a science fictional angle in my story Pythian Games, and in the American Craftsman series, a bunch of the magician soldiers and psychic spies are part of the Ecumene, this group that is fighting, evil across national borders. So I've had a lot of fun with that particular place. And I think particular mythic places may get forgotten as we tend to want to play with the characters in out of context situations, which is fun too, but should be both.
Tigris?
So for me, I like to play around with a lot of different things. What I do is I'll generally take, specifically, I love Egyptian mythology. I love African mythology, Roman, Greek. I like them all, really. I really like them all. But what I tend to gravitate towards is more of Egyptian, African, even some Aztec, Mayan, Belizean, and I'll take these deities and I set them in real life situations. I've had tons of readers come up to me and say, I read your paranormal, but I could totally relate to what this character was going through because I dropped them in the, not quote unquote like a Jerry Springer situation, but almost kind of like that. There's a lot of drama going on. And so they have to learn how to deal with it because in their world, what happened thousands of years ago doesn't necessarily apply to today's society. And I drop them normally in urban settings. I have one, a Southern contemporary, where I have a little bit of stuff happening here and there. And it's fun for me because it's kind of a like, well, what would Romulus and Remus do? What would the Farrell twins do if they, fell in love with the same girl? How are they going to act? What is it going to be that they're going to offer? What can they come up to? And is their claim to fame, oh, we are the makers of Rome type deal? So I'll just sit there and I'll just play with all kinds of things. I do the same thing with werewolves and vampires. I will literally take that werewolf and vampire trope, and then I'll add my mythology piece to it. And I'll do the research and just make up some stuff. And I'll take just a teeny bit of that history. So the reader says, okay, yeah, I read that somewhere, but I don't remember hearing about that part. Well, no, because I made that up. So I just enjoy just playing around and thinking of the most absurd, asinine things that they could possibly go through.
Okay, Kyoko?
So for my series, I have two. So one is a urban fantasy, and that one, at the point where I wrote it, which was 10 years ago, this is 2010, and I kept running into that trope where angels were either not evil, but either apathetic or just jerks, like Supernatural, for example. Most of the angels, aside from Castiel, were like the worst. And so I kind of just was like, I get the point that people were going for, but I kind of wanted them to go back to being like good and benevolent, but also complicated. So that was one thing I wrote for my Angels in the Black Parade series, is that they're altruistic and good people, but they also have complications and they have complex personalities and things that they don't understand about humanity. And, they find it puzzling. So it was fun kind of putting them in the modern day New York setting and trying to adjust to what we're like. And then as far as my science fiction series, which is about dragons being real creatures, like science fiction real creatures. One thing that I really enjoyed about Jurassic Park was the discussion of morals and ethics, like that lunch scene that they have in the first movie. And I decided to write the series because I wanted to approach it from a conservationist sort of idea, because most people don't really view, they're usually in the Western world, dragons are viewed as a nuisance, it's something to kill, something to defeat, it's always the bad guy. But actually in Eastern cultures, most of the time it's benevolent. They believe that they bring rain and sun and, fertility, all these great things. And so that was something I wanted to explore in my series. And that's kind of a trope that I play with, the idea that nature isn't good or evil, it's just nature. And it's all, viewed through a certain lens, it's all in context. So.
Yeah. Patrick?
I play with a lot of mythological tropes. In Murphy's Lore, there are 9 books in the series proper. It's about a bar in Manhattan that's owned by Leprechaun. He bought the bar with his pot of gold, so rainbows lead people in trouble to the bar. Hercules is the bouncer. Dionysus, guy of wine, is one of the bartenders. And I use pretty much every mythology I can pull in, and each mythology is equally as valid. So the fun part is making them all work together so that one story doesn't negate another story. I've worked in Manuk Manuk, the blue cosmic chicken who laid the egg that hatched the universe, managed to tie that into the Big Bang. I have toilet gods who show up for a party at the bar and start warring over who can, do the best job on the bar's toilet. Robagus, the Roman god of mildew, you would sacrifice a red puppy to him on his holiday, and that would keep your crops mildew free, which was a problem, I guess, back then. Kind of forgotten. They managed to get him as the spokes logo for a cleaning product. So I managed to throw in Knights of the Round Table, werewolves, vampires with that. And one of the characters who spins off is a forgotten Sumerian god who's chief of police in hell in Law and Disorder and a graphic novel and another book. So I get to mix that noir with ancient Sumerian mythology with hell. And it's actually a lot of fun to mix it together, because in demonology, there's a demon with his name. So I managed to, someone just got it wrong. He's not a demon, he's a god. In one myth, Leda, who is Helen of Troy's mother, Zeus and the Swan, is, in another story, the mother is Nemesis. I work it so both stories are true. And when Tigris said, what would Romulus and Remus do? I write the Dear Cthulhu columns. It is advice from Cthulhu. There are 6 books. It's on the radio once a month. And one of the books is called What Would Cthulhu Do? So that's just a trope I've been running with since 2005, and it's done very well for me. Have him as a moral authority for all the wrong reasons. You shouldn't kill people because one day Cthulhu will rise up and all humanity will belong to him. So you're poaching. And adultery and other things where you lie and break vows is bad because he has worshipers who have made vows to him. And if they see other humans breaking their vows, they may think they can do it, and it's going to take too much of his time to keep them in line. So all humans should keep their vows. So like more authority, wrong reason. So it's a lot of fun to subvert all that, work in some humor.
You kind of pulled in some things that were from specific mythologies, and several of you did. And I think we're all aware that one person's religious faith is another person's mythology. So with that in mind, what are the ones that you especially lean toward in reading, if not in writing? And do you take any particular steps to demonstrate a certain respect for that tradition? And Fraser, will you start us?
My favorite for reading is Greek mythology. Started reading them about the same time I discovered comic books, and the Olympians are pretty much a superhero team when you get down to it. For them and the Asgardians, I think they are so much in popular culture that, like King Arthur, they are up for grabs. Anything you do with them is kosher. With something a little more, with some, say, Indian or Native American, or people who have a history of exploitation in the past, I'd be much more careful about getting it right. Not that I have written anything with those. But Olympian and Asgardian, I am cool with. And Christian mythology, I will, simply because it is so, it plays into a variety of moral questions. So I don't think I'm disrespectful, but I'm not particularly I am not particularly orthodox about it.
Okay. Violet?
I really love African American mythology. I think, especially in the South, we have a rich mythology. When you're talking about Hanks and Boohags and Heckeyes and all of those things of South Georgia, I love mythology of West African and the African diaspora. When we talk about things like the Orisha and Mamiwata, and these are so many rich things to draw from. And I also love the mythology of, I guess, Judeo-Christian mythology, because I love, you know, the stories of the angels from Jubilees and Enoch, and, you know, playing with some things in the Christian Bible too. When it comes to using any mythology, I treat them all the same. I try to be respectful, but I don't think that art should be muffled in any way.
Okay, Tom?
So it really depends on when you ask me in my life, because I tend to get, you know, go crazy about one for a while and then into another one, and all story is thrilling. But most recently for Agent of Exiles, I first had to, so I have kind of stories out of the Hebrew Bible mash up with stories from Egyptian myth, you know, and mash up with Zoroastrian accounts in these in just book one. And it was fun to mash up. I was respectful about the characters believing, but I don't know if the mashup would be considered particularly respectful in some of the instances. I haven't gotten any complaints yet, but it does it takes the stories at their word. Basically, it takes things like the books of Ezekiel and Daniel about the exile at their word, but you can have some fun with that. And so book two is going to be ancient Greece, and so I was able to immerse myself both in the, again, you know, that's an old fave, but I was able to revisit it now with a lot of sort of academic-y learning and listening to all sorts of lectures and courses and thinking about it in a different way than I would have as a kid. And so it's fun to revisit that. There is, for example, there is a story that I did use the mythology of India. I was using a story as the basis that, you know, was kind of the story itself from the Panchatantra is a bit irreverent, and is from an irreverent time. And so I was using that. So my base plate was a little bit irreverent, but I haven't gotten pushback on it, but I don't know if I would be as bold to go there again in that way. So.
Tigris?
So for me, I agree that art shouldn't be muffled. And again, like Tom said, it depends on the time and the area of whatever I'm working on. Right now, I'm really heavily into Korean mythology and Asian mythology as a whole. But then I've also kicked in some Egyptian, some African. I've even done some Caribbean, and I've kind of like mixed it all in there. I've got a plethora of characters that will be going to an academy for gods based on things, and they're all from different backgrounds. And so the first book that I wrote was accepted, right? They get this acceptance letter, and then they're going to have orientation, and then they're going to be able to pledge to the different houses that they want to go to and be a part of. But they're all regular kids right now, but they have some sort of mythology. I can't even speak of the word. They have some sort of tie to the myth, right, through their ancestry. And it's kind of like, I don't want to say Harry Potter-esque where the owl comes in and drops the invite letter, but it's kind of how it happens. Someone shows up at the door and they're like, hey, you've been accepted to the academy. And that's what it's just called. It's called the academy. They don't know that it's the academy for the gods until they arrive, and their destination is actually Temple Philae in Egypt. That's where they start. So it's really fun. It's really interesting. I've never touched on the Christianity aspect, and it's not out of respect or lack of respect. It's just something that hasn't interested me. So I kind of go on that spectrum. I like the I like the supernatural aspect of mythology more than I liked it to be steeped in what others would probably call the real side, right? The Christian side or the Judean side, or Scientology, any of that stuff. I it's not that I don't want to touch it; it just doesn't have an interest for me right now. So,
Kyoko?
So for me, I actually have a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, and it was specifically so I could have an excuse to go and read Greek mythology and different Christian mythologies. I actually took a class that was on John Milton specifically, and that's what ended up influencing me to write The Black Parade, is that it was such a rich combination of new concepts and things that he integrated into the story, and then the things that were drawn out of the Bible. And so I really wanted to just kind of play around with it because I thought it was such a unique idea to take all of the sort of structured built things that people reference from the Bible and to turn it into its own, honestly, kind of fantasy. And so that was largely, I would say, out of any mythology, that's what I played with the most, is those type of the stories that were told in Paradise Lost. And then I kind of picked up from there and built my own mythology out of that. So.
Okay. Patrick?
I think I try to be respectful of all aspects because just in general, because, people may believe in that. I know people who worship Thor and Odin, Christianity, Judaism. I use actually pretty much every mythology that's been mentioned. At some point has made an appearance in my Murphy's Law universe. There was one story in particular where I introduced the Wandering Jew, and if people are familiar with the legend, he makes fun of Jesus on his way carrying the cross, and Jesus can't do anything to the people around him, but this guy he curses to walk the earth until he comes again. And I kind of explore why that would be done, and I've had several religious people. My own sister is a nun. I was raised Catholic, obviously. I'm practicing Catholic. And I've had several religious people read that story and go, you did a good job. I even have Jesus make not quite an appearance, but Jesus's presence is known by the end of the story. And I've had people who would normally, they're like reading this and they're going, oh no. And at the end they're like, oh, that was very good that it was respectful to the religion, the belief, and to the legend of, how this would happen. And, without giving spoilers from my own story, I think there's no reason you can't be respectful of everything and still make it work for you. You shouldn't be stifled, but at the same time, I'm not one to do, hate stories or stuff. I know there's people out there who do that. But like I said, there's no reason why someone who's very religious in whatever religion, an atheist and agnostic, can't all get along. Just be respectful of each other. And in the Murphy's Law universe, I have a way where all of those can coexist next to each other. Although I've read a few stories that I found just a little disrespectful and a little over the top. Michael Moorcock did one, talented writer, but his time travel story involving Jesus. There's
Behold
one
the man, right? Yeah. Behold the man.
There's one scene where, if you've read it, it's over the top. Without that scene, I would have said, good book. Christopher Moore, Lamb, has Jesus taking kung fu lessons and meeting all sorts of stuff. It's done respectfully with humor, and it's able to be done well. Even though, like I said, Jesus becomes a kung fu master, in the beginning of the book, and a few other things. So, but it's done respectfully, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay, Jenny.
Well, in my Necropolis Enforcement File series, the trope I spin is that when certain people die, they don't necessarily become an evil undead. You can pledge your soul to the gods and monsters or to the Prince of Darkness, and who is not Dracula or the devil, by the way. And so you have good werewolves and vampires and altar demons and everything, anything out of religion, Gollum, you name it, it's in this series. And there are good angels, there are fallen angels, and there are good demons and bad demons. And it's because it's a choice. You have a choice at that time. Who do you pledge to? So I like doing that because one of the things that always bothers me with much of the way everybody deals with mythology is that all of these come from a religion, a variety of religions. All of these monsters come out of religion, and we've spent a lot of time shoving the religion out, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I wanted to put it back in without it being preachy or overwhelming. It's still a good versus evil battle with a lot of humor. But instead, they've pledged, all the people in Necropolis Enforcement who are there to protect mostly the earthly plane, but all the planes of existence from a variety of Armageddons are there because they have pledged to the gods and monsters. So it's a lot of fun because I pull people out of history like P.T. Barnum and Agrippa and all sorts of people. I can pull anybody I want. Which is great, and utilize them in the fight, either on the good side or the bad side. So I like doing that. I agree with everybody else. It helps if you're respectful, but I also agree with you shouldn't be muffled just because. I think everybody, your own innate prejudice shows up somewhere somehow, but I think part of our job as authors is to try to for want of a better word, listen to the better angels, so to speak, and utilize that in our writing so that we're influencing in a positive way. I mean, hopefully people don't read, the Night Beat and go, oh, I want to pledge to the Prince of Darkness. I mean, that's not my goal. But yeah, so I like doing that. And that's also the trope. Remember what I couldn't remember? It was that. That's the trope I suffered.
Alma?
Well, just to echo what everyone else has said, first of all, the key word here is respect. And if you're using a story with respect, I feel that an artist or a writer should not be castigated for simply using that story. That is simply muzzling. The world's stories are the world's stories. They kind of belong to all of us. As far as the more deeply religious aspects of mythology are concerned, well, no two of us here believe exactly the same thing. Anything that you or I or any of you can say is going or might offend any one of the rest of us at any given point because they don't believe the exact same thing that you do. Trying to get everybody in line is absolutely silencing yourself because you're going to offend somebody somewhere by saying hi. It's a given, and it's if you don't do that, if you don't expect that, then you're writing for an audience of one, yourself, because you know that you believe what you believe, and there's no way that you can offend yourself. One of the things that I played with when I was writing my Worldweavers trilogy, which was it's a trilogy with 4 books, so yeah, okay. But basically what I was trying to do there was, this was in the sort of early heyday of Harry Potter, and I was at a convention panel. One of the big names in fantasy kind of heaved a deep sigh when Harry Potter's name was mentioned and said, I wondered how long it would take for someone to bring up Harry Potter. At which point I stopped listening to the rest of the panel because I was plotting the series in my head, which was a fantasy about a girl who would be as American as Harry Potter was English. So what happened there was that I kind of went into the southwestern mythologies of the American Southwest. And one of the characters that waltzed on stage was Coyote the Trickster. And essentially, he kind of evolved and grew. And, well, let me paraphrase William Shatner and say, of all my characters, his soul was the most human. It essentially ended up with him being somebody I literally almost fell in love with, and my character did. But it's a question of, I was treating the story or the mythology or the legend, but I was putting a layer on it that was humanizing it. And one of the ways I kind of worked around this is that when I started doing this journey, the basal mythological layer that I chose was none of the tribes that are currently, if you want to put it that way, using the stories. I went back in time and chose the Anasazi, which are essentially not there anymore. And their mythologies, if I made any mistakes, it kind of gets buried in the dawn of history type of thing. And I apologize for anything else that I got wrong, but I wasn't using someone else's religious beliefs to mock them, which is essentially the basis of story. I mean, you got to use story somehow, somewhere along certain ways. And if you're only ever permitted to use what is inside your own white picket fence in your front yard, who are we essentially who are we writing for? We're looking for an audience out there, and it's been said that if somebody doesn't like your work, you aren't being read by enough people. So you kind of have to expect that somewhere along the line you're going to step in it with somebody. I mean, if you mention an angel to an evangelical Christian, they're probably going to have their own opinions about that very much. Thank you so much. And they're going to take you to task about that. So, it's a question of, yes, respect. You're using a story as a story, but if you're using it respectfully and having researched the basics of it to the point that you are able to give a good account of yourself in that context, I see nothing wrong with that.
Okay. We're actually coming close on time. So this is going to be our last question as we go around. There's so many different tropes to choose from. And all writers pretty much are readers. I mean, there are probably a few out there who take pride that they're not, but they would be the minority. So when you look at a selection of books, is there one particular trope that you are always going to pick that book up and check it out? Even if you don't end up buying the book, it'll draw you to check the book out. Violet, is there one for you?
I don't, believe it or not, I write a lot of fiction, but I don't read a lot of fiction. So I pick up anything that has to do with myth, legend, spirituality.
Well, that's reading. That's not necessarily.
I mean, I read nonfiction.
Right.
I like a lot of history. I don't read a lot of novels. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
But any book that has to do with supernatural elements in religion, myth, legend, spirituality, magic, anything of that sort, I will probably always pick up.
Tom? Can't hear you. You're muted.
Yes, got it. So I, was as a kid was far too apocalyptic. I grew up in the 70s, but my favorite thing to read is something I call anti-apocalyptic fiction, which basically takes the kind of spiritual apocalypse at its word again, but sets up the conflict such that humanity might be able to deal with it with a bit of humor and outgrowing it. And these are books like Good Omens. This is like the big arc of Babylon 5. It was a big sort of, it's most of the mythology behind the Karen Berger Vertigo books back in the day, that sort of assumptions of someone like John Constantine and such. They all believe in a world where maybe, yes, the apocalypse may well be coming, but maybe, just maybe, we've outgrown it. And so I would continue to, I got so into the groove of reading and seeing entertainments like that. I did a whole paper on it for the Center of Millennial Studies, and you can go find that online if you're interested. But there are far more works in that subgenre. It kind of went away at the turn of the millennium a little bit, but I think it's back. So that's what I like.
Okay, Tigris?
For me right now, because it just depends, but for me, I would have to say I am on a post-apocalyptic kick as well. But mine is more of the opposite. Like, it's the end. Let's do everything we can to get through it. And then I also I pick up anything that has to do with Egyptian mythology, whether it be fiction or nonfiction. Doesn't matter if it has Anubis on there, if it has a scarab on there, I'm picking it up. Doesn't matter.
Okay, Kyoko.
For me, probably anything that has to do with immortals dealing with the nonsense that is our society. Just because I think that it gives them a certain perspective, and their reactions to it, to me, is almost always absolutely hysterical. So I was going to say pretty much any of the combination of, and which it could be anything. It could be Dracula, it could be angels, demons, any of the small G gods. And it doesn't have to be in like modern day 2022. It can be in any of the recent decades. But I find those a lot of fun just because I like the perspective you would have if you never died. It would definitely color a bunch of different things that you do and say and how you live your life. So that's probably a trope I always jump on.
Okay, Patrick.
For me, I'd have to say the good private eye trope, one lone man who maybe has, had his life suffer because he stands up for the right, he stands up for the little guy, and he may lose as much as he wins, but he still keeps at it, keeps trying to do the right thing regardless. And the beauty of it is you can get that, in, literature all the way back to Sam Spade, Raymond Chandler, Nero Wolfe, to Jim Butcher now, to Glenn Cook. So you have it with, Dead Witch Walking series. There's all sorts of possibilities you can have with magic and science fiction. You can have men, women, and, alien beings. And it's just, somebody fighting to make some small corner of the world a better place, even if it doesn't make their world a better place. I just think that's my weakness for that. And, I may not buy the book, but I will pick it up and check it out.
Jenny?
Okay, so many decades ago now, I read Park Godwin's Waiting for the Galactic Bus, and that just sparked, I will pick up anything that has to do with what's the real story of God or God and the devil and all these other things, which is why when Tom mentioned Good Omens, I'm like, oh yeah, total catnip, love that book. And there's some I've really hated because I realize I don't like the ones that, like Almighty Me is very, very nasty. It's very, very God couldn't care less. And I realize I don't like those at all. They make me angry. But I like the ones where it's exploring how did this happen, all this stuff, and obviously that's infused Mitochondrial Enforcement Files and other writing. But those are, I like everything across all the boards, but that's the thing. It's are you giving me a new explanation for how that happened? Let me take a peek.
Okay, Alma.
Well, let me preface something by saying I will read anything that's well written. I mean, it doesn't really matter what kind of background it comes from. I'm interested in a broad swathe of mythologically based stuff, and if I find something that looks interesting, I pick it up, and if it's well written, it works for me. There is something, however, that I will kind of do the exact opposite for, reverse osmosis type of thing, and that one thing that I will simply just ignore and walk away from because it leaves me absolutely cold is anything to do with zombies. It just doesn't interest me. Things without brains shambling about don't interest me at all, and I don't care about the zombie apocalypse one little bit. So those I will leave on the shelf where I found them without even looking at them twice. Anything else, any other magical tropes that are out there, I'll take another look.
Okay, thank you. Fraser?
I will from spending a decade in a bookstore, there is almost nothing I will not pick up and at least look at. Tropes that strongly attract me, I think pulp, science fiction, fantasy stuff, ancient cults, lost secrets, mysterious super science, really ridiculous ideas that good authors like C.L. Moore can present as entirely credible and make me buy them. If I'm reading something written in that style today, I would prefer it without the colonialism and the sexism and the racism, but pulp tropes really hook me.
Okay. Well, this actually brings us to the end of our time. So we'll go around one more time. And if each of you would mention any new or upcoming or recent release that you'd like people to pay attention to, and tell us where to find you on social media. And Jenny, we'll start with you.
Okay. You can find me at my website, ginikoch.com. I'm on Twitter. I'm all over the place on Facebook, and I'm on Pinterest. And my most recent release, I have a short story in the anthology Predator, Eyes of the Demon, which went #1 on Audible and in paperback on Amazon. So we're really pretty thrilled. Please pick that up.
Tom? You're muted.
Sorry about that. So you should look for the Tom Doyle that does science fiction and fantasy, not the one who writes about religion and not the one who writes about musicians. So that's tomdoyleauthor.com. My most recent book is actually an audio drama series for graphic audio, Agent of Exiles. The first one is The League of Set, and it is set in the 6th century BCE with very, if you know Wild Wild West, the old TV show or the movie, it's that sort of anachronistic of secret agents in a time where you don't expect them. And it's a lot of fun. So look for that if you like the audio stuff. And that is on audible.com. So if you have credits, use them there.
Okay, Tigris?
You can find me, oh my gosh, I'm everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, Discord, TikTok, Instagram, you name it. You can find me at www.tigriseden.com. I don't have anything coming out yet as of yet. I'm working on an urban fantasy currently based in New York City.
Okay, Kyoko?
Hi, everybody can find me at shewhowritesmonsters.com. It's got all my books there. My most recent book came out in April 22nd, as a matter of fact, so it had a little four-month anniversary yesterday. And that's called Of Claws and Inferno. That's the 5th book in the Science Dragon Hunter series. I've got Terminus 2, which is an anthology, a science fiction anthology, and the fantasy one too. That's by Milton J. Davis, editor, and that's a wonderful, wonderful anthology. And I've got Farther Reefs, which is an anthology that's about sea stories. So, epics and pirates and all those good things.
Okay. Patrick?
I'm at patthomas.net. And for my kids stuff, I'm at patricktfibs.com. I recently had 3 books as Patrick Thomas come out: Frankenstein, Monsters of the Abyss, which retells the legend from the creature's point of view, and you may end up thinking differently about who the monster is. Cryptid Fight Club, which is pretty much what it sounds like. Private eye on a typical divorce investigation comes across a fight club where they're having cryptids fight and realizes some of them have human level intelligence, and he has to figure a way to rescue them. Bikini Jones versus the Brain Nappers from Outer Space, about a woman who's cursed by a witch to forever be in a bikini, and as these things happen, she saves the world on a semi-regular basis. And as Patrick T. Phibbs, I have a YA coming out between now and Halloween called Emotional Support Nightmare.
Okay. Violet?
You can find me on violetmeier.com, and I'm Violet Meier on all social media outlets. This is my latest novel, Oracles. It was released in June, and it's a great paranormal tale that's full of African-American folk legends.
Okay, sure. Fraser, I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Fraser Sherman. You can find me at frasersherman.com, Bogatyr 5, which is a Russian mythological reference, on Twitter. I will have Aliens Are Here, which is a book about aliens visiting Earth in films and TV, will be out in September. My self-published steampunk or gas lamp story, Questionable Minds, which deals with Psionics in a Victorian Setting will be out in November.
Okay. Alma?
Well, I've just put up my details in chat in case anyone wants to copy them off there. My website is www.almaalexander.org, not .com, because that got hijacked by a Chinese cat food manufacturer, don't ask. But it's .org, not .com. And the usual social media suspects, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff. I'm pretty much all over the place. You can find me anywhere you really look. My possibly the latest thing that you might look out for. My website has the book table on it, which you can use to kind of browse through all of my books. But you might want to pay attention to Fractured Fairy Tales, which is something that came out recently, and it's full of fairy tale tropes, if you like, told, retold, reimagined, and what have you. So that might be something you want to take a look at.
Okay. And you can find me at nancynorthcott.com. My latest release, it was The Deadly Orb in the Light Mage Wars Paranormal Romance series. And I'll have a new series, The Merlin Club, which is historical fantasy mystery set in various eras. And you can always find me here on ConTinual. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining the panel tonight. And thanks to all of you for watching. And remember, ConTinual is the convention that never sleeps. You can always find us.